Well, hello, hello. We are back again for another Other Ink Thursday, and this time I'm joined by a writer, creative person, and all of credits all over the industry. Perhaps I don't know. Yeah, they're going to tell me all about it. Ryan Kahn, hello.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, so I was just telling you that like I don't know. I've known you for less than a year, and so that means that I have the false idea that you must have only been in games for about 8 months, which I know is incorrect. So catch me up on like how you got into the industry, how long you've been doing stuff.
So, I mean, I've been dabbling with design basically my entire life. I think as is true for so many of us.
Sure.
But I think I would say I really started taking it seriously several years ago, maybe about 5, 6 years ago, where I really started to like work on games with an intention of completing them and working towards a release. So my first um, major release was Told by Starlight, which is a constellation drawing game where you make up mythology and you end up with this cool star map at the end.
All right. That sounds cool.
And yeah, and that was my first physical release as well. And that physical release is about a year and a half old now. So I would say, still fairly new to designing my own stuff, but I think I would say that, like my other credits, I was a guest writer and a sensitivity consultant on the Wild Sea, and so that was an ongoing project for at least a year before it actually went to Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Just
I mean,
working,
this is a big
yeah,
book, so it happened. It took a
yeah,
while to put that one together, I would imagine.
yeah, and I tend to call it consulting as opposed to reading because it was an ongoing relationship I developed with
Hmm.
Felix Isaacs, the designer of the Wild Sea. And so there was a lot of back and forth through the development, the later stages of the development, and looking at art and wording and representation of different cultures and people. And he very much has the attitude of a rising tide lifts all boats. And
Sure.
so he really wanted to help, bring me more into the industry. So he was always very, very encouraging, very supportive of Told by Starlight, and mentioning it when he did interviews and promoting my other stuff. And so that's when I really started to get into the industry proper, I would say.
Sure.
So that was, yeah, about a year and a half ago where I really started to try and do my own thing in the space.
So, I mean, I didn't make a script for this one, so I don't really know where this is going to go. But like, I, so tell us a little bit more about Told by Starlight because I'm imagining like, so what I'm picturing as a somebody who makes products myself, right? I'm like, okay, so it's you get like a bluish purple piece of paper that has a few constellations seated on it, and then you're given like a pack of silver markers and you're drawing on the big piece of paper on the table and like that's it, it am I inventing something or how does it actually
No,
present
that's
itself?
actually pretty close. Sorry, I've got a guest here.
No, it's
This is
fine.
my this is my editor, I like to
That
say.
excellent. What's your
um,
editor's name? Everybody will want to know now that they've seen the cat.
this is Anzu,
Anzu.
and she likes to watch while I write from this position largely. Um, but yeah, so it's Told by Starlight. The idea is you get yourself a piece of paper and pen. So ideally, if you're doing it, rules as written, you get a black piece of paper and gold and silver markers,
Nice.
and you just dot the paper. Afterwards, there are some rules for setting up where you have to draw a couple of constellations, and then using a deck of cards, you get a bunch of prompts for the theme of the story and the theme and how many stars to use in the constellation. So it relies on some traditional storytelling techniques, The idea of like there's a storyteller who's sharing like the oral tradition
Hmm.
of some kind of mythology, and using some like the face cards, for example, do something different. So if you think of the constellation Ursa Major,
Hmm.
and within Ursa Major is the Big Dipper. So there are rules about extending a constellation to have multiple parts, or you get the story of Orion and Scorpio and how Scorpio kills Orion, which is why they're not in the sky at the same time. Orion's out in the winter, and then Scorpio comes out in the summer. So there are rules for creating constellations that are far apart from each other, and then you weave that into your story. So it is relying a lot on like mythology and traditional storytelling techniques.
That's all. I like everything that I'm hearing. And this is great. I had not heard you or anyone else mention this so
Oh,
before.
I
So
appreciate that.
this is I mean it's neat because it's like um I don't know. I mean it's I was going to ask about like yeah, all those legends and stuff like that. You're creating the mythology, right? I mean it comes off like
Mhm.
um I mean the touchstone that I go to is like something like microscope where you're sort of you've
Yeah,
got
yeah,
full control to make up the history of this world or whatever.
exactly.
You know, so what I want to so like is that a if that's your first sort of like published thing that you completed, maybe not your first completed, but like first that got all the way to the end because there's a
Mhm.
long line of steps
Yes.
before between idea and somebody else can give
Yeah,
you
yeah,
$6 for the PDF or whatever. I mean,
yeah.
there's lots of steps in between. Um, but I'm not surprised at all, knowing you for the little bit that I do, that something that is sort of what I would call a non-traditional game would be the first thing that you worked on like that, because it is, you know, if you grew up playing the crunchy sort of traditional style games that I did, when you come to write your first game, you're like, well, I've got to have fire damage rules and falling damage rules, and I've got to have character classes, and here's all the vehicle and the weapons sections because that's all the stuff that needs to go into a role-playing game, because every game that I've played has all those things in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know
Oh.
what your background is, but like you're definitely like more excited by like weirder, smaller, storytelling focused things than like here's 17 different kinds of guns that you
Yeah.
can use to fight other people and they're who have one of the other kinds
I
of
mean,
those
like,
guns.
I cut my teeth on D&D 3.0 and then
Nice.
ended up playing a bunch of Seventh Sea, and I loved the narrative thrust of first edition and the idea of like relying more on the narrative truth rather than like a bunch of crunchy rules. But I mean, like, listen, I mean, I have my share of heartbreakers as well. But I'm not going to
Sure,
pretend
sure.
I don't. But Fiasco was just a big eye opener, as it was, I know, for so many people being like, oh,
Sure.
games can do this entirely different thing. And it wasn't until, I really started developing games that someone pointed out to me, it's like, that all your games are like, there's no GM. And
Hmm.
it wasn't something I ever intended to set out, like, to do that. It's just creatively, that is where my head just kept going, which is also why Felix asked me to write the Dragonfly rules for the Wild Sea, which is a way of playing without a GM.
Hmm.
So yeah, I really enjoy things that go off the beaten path, things that just like experiment with form and style. It's my happy place.
Yeah. I mean yeah, I don't even know what I want to say, but like there's definitely a it's there are sort of like again to go not to poo-poo that style of publication because like I've put out plenty of games that are just games, they're a book and they fit a certain identity or whatever that is what a book that is what a role-playing game product looks like is it's got about 100 pages, it's about this big, there's a nice illustration on the cover, and I mean clearly there are lots of people who are looking for that. But then it is the world beyond that is also sort of so expansive. I don't know if you know World Champ Game Co. And Adam Vass, but he
Yes.
was in
Yeah.
that interview, he was talking about like his game, which is like made with scratch off tickets and like
Oh yeah, yeah.
you like
I've heard
you
him talk about that.
scratch off like three sections and there's your character sheet and there's like simple rules on the back and that's it and that's all the
Yeah.
that's the only thing there is to it. Um, as far as like a product goes, and I'm sure you have
Hmm.
opinions about this too, because I like the idea of exploring the idea of like where is the game, and I've talked to a couple people this
Yes.
year about it. So
Yes.
like as a somebody who makes products and sells products, right? These are instruction manuals to play games, not in and of themselves games exactly. Although calling it a game is a shorthand, like the game happens when you read it or hopefully when you get, five to six other people together
Yeah.
and you're doing the thing. That's the game. And then that experience brings in so many other parts that it's sort of
Mhm.
beyond the scope of you can't contain the game in a rule book.
I mean, I often think about when I write rules, the success of my rules is, at least the way I see it, is how effectively do I convey the kind of experience I hope the players have.
Hmm.
If I have like an image of like kind of the idealized version of the game, how close do other people get to that without me present? When the only way I have to communicate with them are my rules. And I completely agree with you. Like the game is not the book. The game is not like not even quite the rules. It is the interaction of people with the rules. It's this like weird ephemeral thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, there's certainly more when you think of it that way. There's certainly then even more of that sort of like I don't know, diffuse, like I'm sure you also know you're like a theory person. Again, like I don't know you that well, but you seem to be like a theory type person. We can talk about that in a little bit, but like I I'm not so much into the theory side of things, but I do know people talk about the magic circle. And so this is an activity that we're going to do, and we inscribe a circle around this activity, and then
Mhm, mhm.
there's inside of that circle and outside of that circle. But like to use that as a metaphor more than a actual topology or whatever, like it is the circle gets more and more diffuse as you get kind of outside of
Yeah.
it's is it there's some point at which it's like the it's the heliopause around the sun or whatever. It just gets more and more diffuse. At what point are you no longer playing the game and you've done something else? Like how how nebulous is the rules interactions,
But
uh, you know, I don't
yeah,
know.
and you get this funny I guess tension between the terms game and play because there are
Mm,
things that are playful where that people are clearly engaging in play, but it's not at least not obviously a game.
mm.
And so there is a distinction there. I spent a I, uh, so in my day job, I'm a teacher, and I always want to think of the classroom as a playful space. So I bring a lot of like my experience gaming into the classroom, both explicitly, like I use a lot of games, but also like how do I think about the space and how we interact within that space.
Yeah,
So I,
there's like I don't know what age group you're interacting with, but like I imagine the sort of like elementary school classrooms that I have where it's like here's like the three colors on the wall or whatever, and you get to put your clip on where you're feeling today, and that defines how you're gonna be like I'm gonna treat you differently 'cause where you've claimed
Mhm.
your mood is, like I don't know if that's something you use in your classroom because I don't know what age you're at, but like those roles or whatever that you take on, like now it is time to be a student, now it is time to do the other thing. Like I can see very much that there's that playful space, but there's no rules yet, but there's like there's again a diffuse sort of area
Mhm.
between play and then game. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I teach elementary school right now. I'm teaching a grade 3, 4 class, and I'm actually running a game jam in the class right now.
Excellent. Okay.
Uh,
All
yeah,
right.
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead and finish whatever you're going to say. I'm definitely going to ask you about game jam for very young people next.
Yeah, but I I'm trying to remember the definition of game that my friend always uses, which I love and can never remember, but it is the intentional decision to like make your life more difficult for the fun of it, basically.
Mm,
Because rules put a constraint on how we interact. You know, there's nothing stopping you if you're playing, like a super trad game. The only thing that's stopping you from saying, I just killed a guy is this mutual agreement to be like, no, the way we decide this is by rolling dice and making up some pros,
right.
right? And that is a totally arbitrary decision. Likewise, the concept of like, oh, if I have to kick this ball into this rectangle and I can't use my hands, is a totally arbitrary. Like there are more effective ways of getting the ball through the rectangle, but
Right,
why do you even
right,
want to? Like it's like we've created these constraints just because it makes
right.
things more interesting for a little bit.
Sure. Right, right. I mean, sport is many of those same principles apply, I'm sure. Like a lot of,
Mhm.
I don't know, like a lot of game theory stuff is based on sports stuff, not on like, worker placement games, like yeah. Uh I mean, I'm sure we could talk more about that, about this theory kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
maybe we should, I, so there's so many things. I want to ask you a little bit about the like game jam for young people. I want to ask you about, you were at Breakout Con recently, and I saw that you did
Yes.
a live play, actual play, which I want to ask you about, and then obviously, I want to hear about whatever you're working on now. So there's lots of stuff that I want to talk to you about. So
Yeah.
quickly, so how how did you set it up? Like, how, I mean, you set up your classroom as like a playful space, so you're like, okay, everybody, we're going to do this game jam. And like, what are those constraints, like you were just talking about? What constraints do you think would be fun for this limited period of time? Like, how do you set it up? How do you explain it? Like, I don't know.
Well, the lead up to it, I start playing games. One of my go-tos for this age group is Exquisite Biome by, oh my gosh, I'm completely blanking on the designer's name.
I think I've seen this. Is this a board game, right?
No,
Or,
it's like a collaborative storytelling game.
okay, okay.
But you create a biome and then just using card prompts, you create different creatures and how they interact with their environment. And so at the end, you have what really feels like this very lush environment where like these creatures interact with each other, and like it's just this great collaborative world building activity. But animals are very vivid and simple. And for this age group, I'm like, you're going to draw your animals as we go. So they have something that is like drawing them and that they're doing while we're playing this make believe. And I found that that really helps focus them. And then from there, we start inching out. I mean, I always have to also be aware of the curriculum.
Sure. I'm
So,
aware of standards that have to be met and stuff like that, and you have
yeah,
to like write
which,
forms that prove that you're meeting standards or whatever. So
yeah,
an ecology sort of based thing. It's all kinds of science and sociology standards, I'm sure.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like I know for this, like biodiversity is in the curriculum, so we're talking about biodiversity. Ancient civilizations is another one that's in the curriculum. So we played. I'm sorry, did you say street magic?
Hmm.
As we built these communities and started talking about like what makes communities important, what are important places, how do people interact in these spaces, and so I'm like, but through this, like I'm getting them used to the idea of playing games and that games don't have to look a particular way.
Right. Because
And
I mean,
so at the
yeah, because kids are going to
yeah,
know often, the mass market board games and stuff like
yeah,
that are
of
so
course.
that they're going to know the games in that context.
And so, at the end, like so through that, I can start, there's this kind of brace where like, what are some games, And yeah, we get the mass market games, we get the common card games that kids like to play. Uh, and I was like, yeah, these are all really important. These are all great things to look at. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to make your own. And we're going to keep playing games while we do this so we can look at different ways, different tools we can use. And then I tapped into math by looking at dice probability and fractions. And
Nice, nice.
but it's like that's where all the curriculum tie-ins are, which is more so I can justify to my admin. But
Sure.
for the kids, they're learning these tools.
Well, and it's sort of like, I don't know, I talked to at Gamma Expo, which I was at earlier this month, or well, no, it was last month at the time of this recording. But there was a lot of discussion that I had one of the one days about play, different cultures of play and like what's normal and stuff like that for your play culture. And that's sort of like, there's labels and stuff like that. Again, that kind of gets into like theory and categorization and stuff that I'm not always interested in, but I can see like what you're saying is like, like, okay, so you've played Sorry and there's rules and you roll the die and you move a piece, but now we're gonna do I'm sorry, did you say Street Magic, which is a whole
Yeah.
new way to think about games. If again, setting up straw man, and Sorry is a straw man, whatever, it is it just as an example or whatever, and then like to go beyond that and like no, you can make games, like here's the byline on this game that like somebody made this game and you could make a game. And I don't know, is the first, have you done this before? Is it like, or is this the first time you're trying to do a game jam like this, or is it, I mean, like how successful have you been at like, I'm sure some percentage of the students get it and there's don't need help, and some other percentage of the students are sort of like, yeah, you've now technically made a game, so good job, like, I mean, how have you seen that? I mean, again, I don't know, like if you've done it before, but like what are those kind of
Yeah, so this is
different
the second time
mindsets?
I'm running a game jam for about this age group, and I definitely learned a lot from the first time and have restructured how I'm doing it this time. Uh, I mean, the big thing I want to say is like you can make stuff, and it now exists, and just the act of making it is already valuable. So, like when I'm looking at the output, I don't care if the games are balanced or even if I find them particularly compelling. I'm I'm looking at this act of creation because you got to start somewhere, and you do it by doing it.
Right, right.
So I've got one student who's made a very simple, just like race down the track. You're a monkey, and the bananas at the end of the track, and you roll dice and you move along the track. And it's like, okay, the
It's a
complexity is,
game.
yeah, but it's full on a game. And initially it was like, I asked you, is this a for one player or for more players? So, oh, it's just a one player game. So like, okay, so I'm like, oh, let me play this. All right. And so I roll the dice and I eventually get to the end. I'm like, cool. And she's like, wait, if there's another person, you could try and get there first. Yes. But like there's this like the iterative design, the idea that like
Mm,
she did this thing and now she's gonna build on this thing, like that's really cool. And like seeing her have that moment of like, oh, I can add this whole new dimension to my game. It's like,
double
yeah.
the game. What if we were playing at the same time? That's
Right.
that's amazing. That's amazing. uh I personally am a big advocate for like that sort of like just get out there and make one, like don't have your first game be, this is my advice for anyone who's asking me like how to make a game. I'm like, do not start with a 350 page fantasy heartbreaker. Do not start there. Start with like a one page game about a monkey trying to get a banana. Like that is,
Yeah,
because you'll finish it and it may not innovate the industry, it may not be good, but you did it and you finished it, and now you're a game designer and you can move on to something else, um
absolutely. Completely good. I
yeah.
completely agree.
So I'm so stoked to hear that you're bringing that down to like the a very young age. You know, that's great. Hopefully, hopefully, you'll have a whole class full of game designers. And
I
then
mean, there's some cool games that are emerging from these students. Like there's one where you drop a block to try and land on certain targets, and
okay,
I think you roll a d10, and so you're forced to aim for certain ones. And so like there's an interesting like little dexterity piece, and like the dropping the block is really unpredictable. So
yeah,
like, but it's like, okay, this is cool though. And then like you got the art piece where like he's designed his board, and then I'm getting them all to write the rules so that if they're not there, somebody else can play the game. So
right,
there's this
right.
big literacy piece where we're actually reading other rule sets. and looking at how they're organized and what information needs to be there to make the game understandable to a third party.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is like I definitely did games. I'm trying to remember. I made a game on my own in grade school sometime, and I'm trying to remember when it. I did one as an assignment, but I think that was in high school. Like we had, but it was all
Mm.
the same sort of things. We had to write the rules, and the idea of design was part of it. But it was yeah. But yeah, it's great. I love everything you're telling me here, Ryan. This is great. Um, so I am mindful of our time. We don't want to. We You said we don't have forever to chat
Yeah.
about things. So I do want to hear about Breakout Con as well because I saw pictures of you playing a game live. It was like an actual play, but it was like it may have been recorded and streamed as well, but you were definitely like playing it for an audience uh
uh,
in a room full of
Actually,
people at the con, right? So
so I was on a panel. I for
so if I
the Wonderful
misinterpreted the
World.
photo, is that
Well, the photo you probably saw was just an impromptu play test that we played. Just we found a couple of tables in a hallway, and so there wasn't an explicit audience, but there were definitely people walking by with curious looks on their faces. The game is probably one of the most hilarious games I have ever played, called Fellas, Is It Gay?
okay. I
And
heard of this game for sure.
it is satirical and laughing at this kind of like the cultural essentialism of like, oh, this thing is gay or this thing is not gay. And so the designer Ash, I'm trying to remember how to pronounce their last name. I think it's Ash Kreider, but um, the game is available on itch right now, and you start out by just naming random things that are now officially gay according to your bro code,
Right.
and then they went on Facebook and polled their friends or their community, like, what's the most absurd thing that somebody has told you is gay? And so you then argue about whether or not these things are gay using your list of things that are gay in your bro code. So like ours was the number 6 is gay, but the number 9 is not gay. Uh, Vegetables are gay, fruits are not gay. And
And
and then like, you know,
so it sounds, I
but
mean, you said the first thing you said is that this is satire. It sounds very satirical. Like
oh.
it is a uh I don't know, I don't even know how to it it's like a I don't know, it's like the revealing that like all social constructs are constructed, right?
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah,
and
exactly,
playing with that
exactly.
idea.
Yeah, and so it's about laughing at this idea that anything can just be gay. And like in the rules, it's like if you're thinking about the nuance of these things, stop. You've gone too far. So
Right.
like one of the like random things that just like, that someone had heard was gay was going on a diet. I don't know why changing how you eat could or could not be gay, but that was something that someone heard. So then we have this argument like, well, going on a diet is gay because you eat vegetables and vegetables are gay,
Right, right.
clearly. And
Clearly.
it's just like, it is the absurdity of the whole thing.
Right.
And just you get to luxuriate in the stupidity of it all for a bit.
And so I obviously so I've never been you said that you had audience people you had a sort of impromptu audience of people walking by.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think what I've my question is conflated two happenings and we'll get to the panel in a second, but like um it's so like I don't know anything about Breakout Con. I've not been up there for that one. That's in so tell us a little bit about Breakout Con and like
Yeah.
what's the vibe there because it seems like I've, I mean, I've been to a lot of the big cons in the States, and like people are doing game stuff in the hallway, but like I don't know that exactly like that. But maybe somewhere I've seen this sort of like impromptu playtest happening, but usually you're on the way from one thing to the other at a
Mhm.
at least I am. But so what's Breakout Con? What's kind of the vibe there? And because like it's small, right? But is that just because it's in Canada? Sorry, your population is so much smaller than the United States. Like,
I mean, it's like a tenth of
you're
like
right.
the
It's
population of the United States.
right.
Like
So
it's
therefore, your
just
biggest con will be a tenth of the size of like the average North, or the average. Yeah, I don't know. Is it just a feature
it.
of it being Toronto, or is it a small con by design, or is it just a small con
I think
because?
I think because of the location and the Canadian market uh, is quite different in a lot of ways. I wouldn't necessarily say it's as different as the markets say in Europe, but our proximity to the American market really colors some things in different ways. Where it's like I'll see all these Kickstarters, like, well, this cool thing's coming out, but shipping is the same price as the thing, so
Right,
I'm
right.
not going to pick it up. So the vibe at Breakout Con is it's a lot more laid back than something like Gen Con. Attendance is lower. I'm not sure what the attendance was this year, but I guess still a steady stream of people. But because of the smaller size and the people who say get to exhibit, I was tabling, and most of the tables were indie designers. Like I was there tabling with friend and fellow designer Julian Legault, uh, who just released their new game, The Things We Become. Gorgeous little hardcover affair about mutation and belonging. But then you have
That's a good one
like so,
page one. That's a good elevator pitch.
but like a lot of zine size games and a lot of like smaller designers who either are doing it on their own or have like a very small like publishing house kind of thing going on. We have Composed Dream Games, which is kind of like Canadian IPR,
Okay.
but filling
I,
a niche of like it is Canadian distribution, which means that when I buy things from them, I'm paying domestic shipping as opposed to international shipping. That makes a
sure,
big
sure,
difference.
sure.
And because of the draw, you can get a lot of like smaller titles on there that you wouldn't necessarily find elsewhere. So if you want a physical copy of Told by Starlight, Composed Dream Games is where you want to go.
All right. That'll be in the show notes. But then it'll be, only domestic for those of you in Canada.
Yeah, but yeah, it's laid back. I really enjoy it because uh, it's really easy to talk to people. Just in terms of like logistics, like volume, I can actually talk to people.
Right.
But also with the smaller number of people, like there are a couple of faces that you start to see, and it's like able to have like nice conversations with people. And it's got a nice, fun vibe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Toronto is one of the bigger cities in Canada, so then it's got probably the most game designers per capita. So then like there's like a strong industry there. I mean, I know I can think of a few people who are all in that sort of area, but then like you know, no, I mean, except for Vancouver, none of the places that are populous in like
Yeah.
Canada are very far away from Toronto. So then like everybody could be there,
Yeah.
like it's a whole, is it one of those kind of cons where like you see everybody
Oh, yeah.
because
Yeah.
because everybody's, it's the con, it's the Canadian con. So everybody comes.
Yeah. So like, going there, a lot of familiar, like Daniel Kwan is there. They did a live recording of Asians Represent.
Nice.
Um, I'm trying to, what else did I see there? I saw a few people from Hit Point Press who did like they had animated tarot cards and they did
Yeah,
like
yeah, the like lenticular cards or whatever, right?
yeah. Um, like good folks, Lauren Bryant Monk, who uh, did writing for the RPG Safety Toolkit, is there. Um, Kurt Reffling, who did Here We Used to Fly. Like so, there are people who are like, I go to this and I'm like, oh, I want to see this person. I haven't seen since last Breakout Con because it's just how it
Right.
goes.
It's the people, right. It's, yeah. So you said you were on a panel too, and I think that's the actual, I see it, that's the photo, because
Yeah.
you were on, I'm friends with Bridget Jeffries, and I believe she was on the panel with
Oh,
you.
yes, yes,
So,
yes.
that was the one that was about the actual plays. So tell us just quickly about that too, because like, what was
Yeah.
the panel about?
So the panel was the wonderful world of indie RPGs, and just,
Mm,
I mean, talking a lot about the kind of stuff that we've been talking about here, these kind of smaller size games, and one part, like, how does the the industry look from that perspective
mm,
compared to, being a major publisher, but also like how to kind of break into the industry, and just this idea of like what makes something indie, and
yeah,
looking at as indie as like an attitude, or indie as like a do you have a publisher? Yes,
yeah.
no.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a true really indie, like, if you're, I don't know, yeah, the self-publishing, yeah, I mean those levels of like, if you self-published it, are now you a publisher, or are you an indie because you did it, if you
Yeah.
did it yourself, I don't know, you could publish it and then not come up with a company name, so then like you don't have a company, but then the those people who are like their company and they're themselves are a circle, like,
Yeah, and then you
um
have like game co-ops, which like you do have the collaboration, so it's not by yourself, but it still has that kind of DIY spirit.
sure, sure. And then even, I don't know. I'm always struggling with like where wet ink is. Like, are we I believe I've come to accept that we're like a medium-sized company at this
Yeah,
point. So are
not
we
bad.
still indie, or are
Not
we
bad.
like,
Juncture sitting right there
yeah,
on
exactly,
my
exactly.
shelf.
I saw it there when you first came on the camera. But felt a little gauche to point out myself. The uh Uh, but like we're doing all right, but I think there's some indie spirit behind what we're trying to do, and even though we're trying to grow and stuff like that. So, indie is like, what is indie is sort of like not necessarily worth defining, but then also like
Yeah,
it depends on context, like what does it mean.
absolutely.
Um
Because because if I think about meeting you at Gen Con, and you have wet ink games there, and you have like MythWorks, I feel like is operating on a similar sort of scale. Um,
there's
Possum
several.
Treat Games, Possible World Games, all kind of in this like
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
these are all the like medium, the mid-sized small
yeah,
companies. Like every RPG company except for like two are small companies. And
yeah.
then there's some bigger small companies and then some smaller small companies, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
Um
and I think like to me the idea behind like indie games is less about like distribution
mm,
or company size, and a little bit more on kind of the scope, and I guess the net that you cast when you talk about indie games. I'm thinking a lot more like zine games, or these smaller scale games, or these games that do a lot with a very small amount of game, like the game text to game ratio. You know what?
sure, sure. The Yeah, that's an interesting, because that goes back to like what I was saying before about like the gun stat blocks or whatever that are in my first game. It's like, do
Yeah.
those add to the game, or those just add to the word count of the book? Like, I don't know. I think at the time I felt like they were, you got to have all these different, because we had different nations, and different nations had different traditions of industry, and so they had
Oh
different gun
yes,
stat
of
blocks,
course,
and
of
so
course.
it adds to the thematic flavor of but then like now, after being in the industry for, I'm like, no, you got a gun. You got a big gun or a small gun. That's the only two kind of guns you need. Like, and the rest is all, you can add all the theme in and flavor on your own. But like as a book,
Yeah, yeah.
like two stat blocks only, big gun, small gun. That's it. And but anyway, I think I got distracted with something like there. We've talked for a while already, and I know you've got to go before too much longer. So, but before you go, please tell us about Bug Dish because that is sort of your big project. That is,
Yes.
or maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Maybe you've got another
Oh
project you'd
no, it
like to
is.
talk about instead.
No, bug dish is something that I've been cooking for a little while, and I'm really
Cooking, aha.
and really trying to get it out now. Bug dish is a game where you play chefs who are bugs, and you travel the world in your food truck to compete in culinary competitions.
This is I have read at least one version of the game. I know you recently updated it, but yeah,
Yes.
this is great. I love this concept. It's very strong, and the execution is also right there. Like it is a great idea, and so what? How does some of the stuff work? Because there's like again, as somebody who's read like the game, there's like ingredients and recipes, and like you got to kind of bribe the judges, or that's a possibility. Like you don't disallow that, but it's not bribing them. It's more like you got to get some intel, and then like
Yeah, yeah.
you've got the like the older
It's
judge that you can find out the rumors about, and then you mix their favorite ingredient into your recipe. But then, like to get the ingredient, you've got to like do a favor for somebody else. There's lots of little things that are going on in there. Tell us some more
yeah,
about like
it's
how it works.
the term that I've been using is narrative crunch.
Okay, okay,
So like there are a whole pile of like I call them features, but aromas, textures, and flavors that can end up in your meal. If you're looking from like a strictly crunchy point of view, they're all like operatively the exact same. Like if the thing that the judge likes is in your meal, great. If the thing that the judge doesn't like is in your meal, bad. But what I found through playtesting is that because the words are evocative and food is something that we all have a relationship to,
sure.
good or bad. It's a part of our daily life. It is rooted to culture and family and all of these things. So like I really wanted to bring the romance of cooking. How do you tell a story through a meal? And so by having these words like delicate or pungent, hearty, floral, like it gives a different impression of what these foods are. And I found that people really get into that. Like the way people talk when they're kind of brainstorming these recipes. It's like, yeah, it's like, oh no, but we really need to get that crunch in there. The crunch is really important. So it mechanically it uses a push your luck system of like you are rolling to get within a certain sweet spot, which is determined by the number of players. And if you roll too high, you go bust, like burning your dish. But you can also undercook a dish where you might run out of time before you hit the sweet spot.
Right.
And so that's the kind of the push and pull of like, what are we trying to do? And the chefs have different talents that are all assigned a different die size. So having a D4 isn't inherently good or bad because if you're getting really close to that sweet spot,
Yeah.
you might want a little bit more precision as opposed to like, oh, I've done almost nothing to
Yeah.
contribute.
When you're almost there, you don't want to roll the 17 on the D20 because then,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. So it's like a team. So do you play a team of chefs that are sort
Yes.
of like step one, step two, step three, and then the dish is delivered, or are you in rival food trucks, one person, one bug, one truck, one rest, like competing with each other?
So it's cooperative. I
That goes back to your
love
theme of like no GM needed, right?
yeah. Although this is my one GM'd game. Surprise!
Okay,
Like it,
okay.
it, it started without a GM, but I found it actually just worked better with a GM. But I love cooperative games because of how it gets people to communicate. And one of my favorite parts from playtesting is listening to people come up with the meals as they're shooting these ideas around. Like, how do you hit the theme? Because every competition has a theme, like a little taste of home. like what does that mean? It's kind of up in the air, but there's lots of different ways to take it. So people discuss these different things and like how do you make that come alive? And so there was a table where they made um an actual like house. And so the idea was that the chef would or the judge could go inside and eat the house from the inside out to to remind you of hatching from
Yeah.
an egg. And
Right, right. Of course.
of
It's a giant,
course,
giant gingerbread sort of thing, but like made
yeah,
of bug food.
yes. And and I think that the bug part reduces stress for people who say don't feel like they know as much about cooking or don't know
Right.
as much about food. It's like, well, they're bugs, and every ingredient is just made up. So there's no pressure to know food in any particular
Right,
way.
right. Yeah. You're not going to need right, because bugs are going to
Yeah,
eat weird things most likely anyway, and
yeah,
yeah, that's right. That's I hadn't thought of. I was just thinking of it as like a cute thing that like, oh, it's bugs, it's fun. Like
yeah.
just mix something unexpected together with something else, and
It's that
that's
too.
it. It is that, but it is also like I hadn't thought of it as like because you mentioned like people have different relationships with food, and so like some people have well, like stressful stuff related with food.
Yeah,
So then like to separate that out and be like, it's bug stuff. Like it's fine. Just have this fun experience. Yeah.
and with some of the rules and the flexibility of like what you do, there's a lot of ways to interact with the game mechanically that doesn't involve food. So I had a playtester who was intentionally trying to be like, what will happen if I do nothing with food at all? And so their whole thing was like trying to sabotage their rival kitchen. So there are rules for setting up your rivals so you can meet them various times. So you build up that rivalry so you can have a nice big
Right.
showdown at the end. But like sabotage, stealing something from the judge and then hiding it in their dish so the judge would be like, oh, this is a thing that was stolen from me, and here it is. And getting fireworks to go off outside while the presentation of their own meal, like so doing all these wild things, but all of these things like the presentation of a meal and impressions, like it still works mechanically. So you don't even have
Yeah.
to directly engage with the food and still have this really enriching experience, like a fun time.
Yeah. That's that is fun because there is like all this culture sort of in the implied, at least in the version that I read. There's a lot of
Yes.
implication. There's not a lot of like, again, there's no stat blocks for like there's very short little stat blocks about the different festivals and the locations in the bug world and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
it's not pages and pages of lore. So
No.
it's
Uh,
fun to
I
bring
I
in
don't
all those other
I don't
things.
like pages and pages of lore. Like I have never used a pre-made setting. I bounce right off of lore, so I'm not about to write a ton of lore either. It's more like here's a bit of seasoning if you want
Right,
to use it, and if you don't, that's fine too.
right, right. All right. Well, it sounds super fun. And what is the so here's the one transition thing. Like where can I know people can get it because I've read it. So like where can people get it right now? Like the version that it exists right now. Where can people get that?
So you can get it from my itch. You can get the amuse bouche version, which is like kind of an ashcan one-shot adventure. Uh, and that's at rkhan, so rkhan.itch.io/bugdish. Full release is coming this summer, which will include like character creation rules, rules for your rival, and running like an entire circuit. So it's designed to be a short campaign game, kind of like a six-ish, plus or minus a couple of sessions sort of affair, where you build up a couple of rivalries and then have a nice big showdown at the end while you travel around the world and make all these discoveries and help your chefs deal with their troubles,
Oh, all right.
all all through the metaphor of food.
I don't think the chefs having troubles was part of the version that I read. So
No, I don't think so.
that'll be interesting to see the full thing when it comes out. Well, Thanks for that. And we'll put a link to that in the description of this video as well. Where else can people maybe get a hold of any, if they want to, I don't know, to talk to you about game jamming for young people, or congratulate you on Wild Sea, or I don't know, where else are you on the internet that you want to
So
be found at?
you can find me on Bluesky. I'm trueryankhan on Bluesky, and my online handle predating any game design stuff is Harry B Modest, which is there's a whole story for that for another time.
For
But
another time.
that's my name on Discord. I love to talk about education and games and the intersection because I think that being a teacher and being a GM are basically the same thing.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I don't think I've heard it said quite that way, but that yeah, I agree that there's some stuff there. Um, all right, well, thank you again for your time today, talking to me
Well,
about
thank
game
you.
stuff, and yeah, I'm looking forward to Bug Dish and all the
Yeah,
other stuff coming from you, and I'm gonna yeah, Star Game, I'm gonna check that out too. So again,
I
thank you for your
appreciate
time,
it. Thank
and
you.
thanks to all the viewers for watching this video.